Hello everybody, I am the Stray Prophet, and today we have a gameplay of Sevarog in Paragon. Now, Sevarog is the newest hero to be released in Paragon, and he's been out for a couple of days. This gameplay is actually my first time playing him, so I was a little bit rough on his mechanics, but he's actually really fun and quite an interesting hero. He scales into late game incredibly well with his passive. Now, his passive is Soul Trap, I believe. That means that whenever he gets a kill with his Q, Siphon, he will gain a stack. Now, each one of those stacks increases his health and the damage of his Siphon. If he gets to a certain point, a checkpoint, then he will gain another damage boost to Siphon, and his pauldrons will actually grow. You actually can't see the pauldrons right here, but he eventually gets these enormous spiky pauldrons, which you'll see later on. I was happy I got to 100 stacks because I was really curious to see what they looked like. As you can see, he's got a very large hammer, and he has that really satisfying looking third swing in his little attack animation combo. So it looks just incredibly satisfying whenever you just hit the ground like that. I mean, it doesn't do any more damage like something would in Smite whenever you have an attack progression and you attack this fast with the first attack, this fast with the second attack, and they do damage accordingly. So unfortunately that's not the case. But as you can see, I got a kill with Siphon right there, so that kind of gets the stacks going. You actually have your own little individual stack meter just below and to the left of your Q. So it's actually very helpful. Grux and Feng Mao decided they were going to help me here. Feng Mao, I was half sure that he was jungling with me, but sometimes he just sat there, like right now. He said that he was having lag a couple of times during the match, so I presume that was it. Now, the Siphon does have an AoE. It's very small, but there is an area of effect to it, so if you manage to group the jungle creeps together, you can actually be extremely effective. Sevarog's mana pool, however, is really on the low side, especially even compared to other tanks, just because he uses his abilities quite a bit more. Because he has no his gap closer, the Phantom Rush, which I picked up at level 2, because I was going to be ganking on the right lane there. It does cost quite a bit of mana, and it is a very neat dash, though. It is not like a blink; it's just a it has a bit of a wind up almost. But the dash is extremely effective at closing the gap, since unless you have something like a Siren Song item where you can activate it to slow on auto attack, your root, your E, is really your only way of getting any crowd control to keep people near you, because your ultimate is a hammer that smacks them away. So unless they're up against a wall, that's not really going to do much to help you keep close to them. Since your Siphon doesn't slow, your auto attacks don't naturally slow, and your Phantom Rush is your only real gap closer. With his Siphon, what I noticed is that the damage seems to go up a little bit each time you get some of those stacks, but it goes up in a fair chunk whenever you reach a threshold, one of the checkpoints. The checkpoints are 20 stacks, 40 stacks, 70 stacks, and then 100 stacks. You can stack higher than that, though. So these stacks can go presumably infinitely if you keep the game going long enough. I have yet to test something like that. But I think I got to about 120 or something to that regard stacks this game. I decided to give mid lane a little bit of a help here. I was a little bit late to save Grux, but luckily we managed to snag a kill. I used my Phantom Rush to get out of there, but I also kind of moved my camera so it just looked completely awful. Now, Feng Mao, he wasn't really present too much in the game, since he was mostly ducking in and out with lag or just stopping in the middle of it, which is understandable, but that kind of left each lane, except for Murdoch on the left lane, in a little bit of a rough situation because Grux is a melee character in the mid lane, and in the right lane, I believe we had a Kalari. Was it a Kalari? Either way, with this build that I had, I did make a custom deck for Sevarog, but I didn't know exactly what he needed because I wasn't sure what his damage output would be. So I kind of threw in a little bit of everything, including that Hunter's Guile, which was actually from my first card pack in Paragon, and it has a cleanse for an active. So I think it's very helpful considering Sevarog does get a lot of health. I mean, you can look already. I'm just level 4 and I have 1200 health. His health pool is massive, though he can get kited and CC'd down really easily because his Phantom Rush, not the best escape in the world, and if he gets caught out, he's pretty much done for if he can't manage to fight them off. His damage is great for a tank, but it's still tank level damage, so he's not going to. He doesn't really have a big nuke. I mean, I wouldn't say that many of his abilities have extremely high base damage, but his Siphon does have a really low cooldown. So I think he's more of like a sustained damage tank as opposed to someone like, say, Steel, who has his Shield Slam that's going to do a massive amount of damage, and then he's just going to try and CC them down at that point. Now I get a double snare here, and that snare also slows for about 3 seconds after, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, with Muriel's insane amount of healing, there wasn't really much that I could do. Kalari also missed her ultimate, so that also was not too fun. Siphon, I have to say that the Siphon animation looks really, really cool. Just having that spectral hand that comes out and just tears the souls out of your enemies. You know, fun stuff like that. But the root has... I think the best thing about that root is probably its cast range. The cast range on that root is ridiculously high. He can cast that, I believe, farther than Gideon can set up his meteors, which is crazy. I mean, it's great for him to be able to Phantom Rush and get close afterward, but sometimes even his Phantom Rush is not long enough to get close to somebody if he snares them at max range. And there's the ultimate, Colossal Blow. Big thing about Colossal Blow, it does have a charge up. So you have to be very wary that you don't use that if you absolutely need it right then. You have to prepare for it a little bit. Because while the knockback is amazing and very helpful, especially if you get behind an enemy and you knock them straight into a tower, it's great. But the first time I tried using this, I ended up having to charge it up, and I could not, for the life of me, get it off as fast as I wanted it to, because I was not aware that it had that charge up. And I wanted to go get the Harvester on the right here, because it did pass that 6-minute mark, and I wanted to use my Harvester's key before I went back, because every time you go back to base, for those of you who do not know, Harvester's keys and wards will, as well as your potions, will refill themselves. So you could easily like go to the right lane, put the Harvester down, then go to left lane, put the Harvester down. And there's no cooldown except for the very, very short cooldown, but you couldn't get there that quickly anyway. Unfortunately, they had a Harvester there, so I couldn't really do much, and I had to go back. But I decided to start off with an Adamant Edge. I don't know why I went for that first. I looking back on it at least, I mean, it does give some tank and a little bit of flat health and then some damage, which is great. But I think Sevarog works a lot better if he can just be that. He can add some CC items. Now, Shockwave would be a great item on Sevarog if he can get a nice engage, because it does that AoE knockup for an item, which I think is great. I think Siren Song would be good too, because he's actually not Fury, he is Growth and Corruption, so he's green-black. Which, I mean, looking at his color scheme, you can imagine why he's green-black, because, I mean, his color scheme is green and black. And I'm starting to get a little bit better at the Siphon Last Hitting here, because I want to get some of those stacks. It's somewhat similar to Nasus from League of Legends, but personally I think that this is a little bit better because it can have an area of effect, and if you get a bunch of minions, especially the ranged minions, low, you get 3 stacks with one use of the ability, which is fantastic. The enemy team also did have a Sevarog, since this was pretty early in the morning whenever he came out, so everybody was really wanting to try him. That's why the queue time was like 45 minutes to actually get into a game. Since if you wanted to play Sevarog, of course, if you were playing anybody else, it was better than normal. Looking here, I was trying to make something happen with Sevarog, but he had a ward up there, and I saw the ward on the ledge. And although I couldn't see it, I got the attention of our Murdoch, who managed to shoot it. And I had never placed a ward there before. I usually end up placing it in the invisibility field, so that way I can see if somebody's stealthed inside of there. But that was a pretty good ward placement, especially against, melee opponents, because they have no way of getting up there. I mean, I guess I could have definitely tried to, throw my snare up there, but that would have been extremely inefficient, since I do know that abilities can harm wards. Now, Gideon ganked on that Murdoch there, and he managed to get away with that, because Gideon has a lot more roam potential than Grux, as far as that goes. Now, I was still working on the range of the Siphon, so I did miss it there. I just kind of wanted to go for it and see if that worked. And the enemy Sevarog showed up, so I was just like, nope, I'm done. I'm not gonna try and fight both of them. That snare is a very powerful crowd control tool, though. If you get more than one person, that is a large amount of worthwhile effort right there, just because of the sheer snare and then the slow afterward. It's almost like a Murdoch's trap slow whenever you end up using it, and that's after the snare. So you essentially get a snare that's almost as long as if you got hit out of travel mode, then you get a slow like you stepped on a Murdoch trap. So it's kind of a little wombo combo there. Going back into the jungle here, I wanted to make sure that I picked up some of that Harvester XP, since I wanted to keep an eye on that. And generally, at least as far as what I think, the Harvesters are not only the entire team's responsibility, since a lot of people are still learning how important the Harvesters are, because a full Harvester nets about 340 card XP. A kill will usually net you about 850 to 900, and that's the total XP that you pick up off the ground, not the XP you get instantaneously. So while it is not as much as a kill, it is still extremely useful. And I think that, especially junglers and supports who help out with, applying pressure to other places and can be roaming around quite a bit, that making sure that those harvesters are never overloaded and aren't getting attacked is extremely important. That back animation is just beautiful. He is spooky. When you thought Kalari was spooky, this is the real spook. He is a ghoul if you've ever seen one. A ghoul with a very large, very threatening hammer. And as you can see, I got to 20 stacks, and that gave me some little pauldrons there. They're not very amazing pauldrons. I wouldn't take those pauldrons and show them off to anybody. They're just miniature pauldrons. Just like little curved horns. And we ended up getting Murdoch got left lane tower here, and Gideon, he was in travel mode trying to get a gank, but he was taking a lot more damage than he should have. So I was just like, okay, thanks for the free kill. He basically ended up giving that to someone on a platter, even though he got the kill on Kalari. He ended up giving himself up in the process. Now, I did not go out of travel mode fast enough here, and again, I did not have my engage or my root. So I was going to try and phantom rush closer and then get the snare, but I aimed it too far, and I just sort of whiffed all of my abilities, and then I just wanted to walk away in shame. I had to take the walk of shame for missing all of my abilities. But it's something that's definitely useful. If you can stick close to somebody as Sevarog, this steel just wouldn't leave me alone. If you can stick close to somebody as Sevarog, you are really hard to deal with, just because of your sustained damage. Muriel ulted back to steel, which I was fine with, because that means the other lanes were safe from her for a time being. I didn't have my root when I needed it right there, because I wanted to use it on steel whenever he decided to tower dive for the unknown reason. So I just decided I was going to try and siphon a little bit, use my potions, keep a little bit of pressure in this lane here. Now, Feng Mao was ganking at the time, so he was trying to make something happen. I tried to get the root here, and I ended up snagging Muriel. I did not use the ult, mainly because I just ran out of mana. and I was pretty low on health. But we ended up getting steel relatively low. I phantom rushed straight into the wall. Professional plays right there. And then I decided, you know what? I'm just gonna whack on the harvester a little bit more. Now, even if you don't kill the harvester, and this is important, pressure on that harvester is always good, because even if you aren't killing it for good, you know, because it takes a really long time to kill it by yourself, every time you hit it, they lose some of that card XP that's in there, and it takes about what 5 seconds, I believe, to get one card XP notch in the harvester. So you're essentially taking away 5 seconds of their time every single time you decide to make that type of decision. And I think that it's very worthwhile. I think that, trying to apply pressure to those harvesters constantly can give your team an advantage that can turn the tide of battle in some cases. All right, here we are. With some new items, I have my Adamant Edge. Still working on it now. But I'm just starting to get some of the harvesters on the right here. I didn't get the harvester on the far left side, just because I had to keep applying pressure to the right lane. Since Kalari can't 2v1 Steel and Muriel, I mean, Muriel makes Kalari's life hard enough as it is, but somebody like Steel, who can just take the brunt of that damage and just shrug it off, makes it way too hard for Kalari to do that on her own. Murdoch overextended here, even with a ward, and he was just about to have a really, really bad time since the entire enemy team decided they want to say hello. Unfortunately, there wasn't really much that I could do, but I decided I was going to do something anyway. Here's the part where I was trying to hit them with my hammer, but I figured out that that is not how my hammer works. And although I managed to try and get the swing off, I wasn't even sure if I got anything. I was doing my best to weave here and buy time for my cooldowns, but I made the fatal mistake of not using my potions as soon as I lost health in the middle of a battle. And the reason why that's important is because that's more effective health over time. And that would have given me probably enough health for me to Phantom Rush away. It may not have saved me, but it would have gotten me a lot closer with a better chance of living than just weaving and weaving and weaving. It's always good to be able to weave like that and dodge. Some people, for some reason, think that dodging in a straight line is the best way of going about it. But unfortunately, that's not going to really do much because you end up taking a lot more damage overall just by walking in a straight line. You're essentially just giving your opponent an easy target. That weave can sometimes change the course of you getting away or you dying a horrible death. Feng Mao and Kalari did manage to pick up a kill, which is fantastic, but that did leave right lane unattended, so naturally the Spectral Undertaker wanted to go help out here, was not able to save the tower, but I did want to help out. At least Steel charged into the minions and decided that he wanted to fight instead of flee, but Muriel showed up, and naturally that meant that he wasn't dying anytime soon. So all I did was snare Muriel, and then I just started to run away, because although Sevarog does have a lot of health, since I decided to build more flat health for some reason, instead of giving some armor or energy penetration, then I ended up becoming pretty squishy compared to the effective health I would have gotten. Now, the funny part of what happened there is that Muriel did ult Steel, and then I ulted Steel away from me. So the knockback from Muriel did not affect me, which was nice because it probably saved my life. Grux did end up having some assistance for me here. I was just trying to live as much as I could. I got the snare on him, and then I was just running away as fast as I could because I didn't do enough damage, nor did I have the tankiness to survive that. And looking back on it, I probably should have built him with a lot more bulk than I did, since he has flat health as part of his natural scaling with his passive. It makes a lot more sense to build some armor and some energy armor instead of just building more flat health, because you get a lot of flat health on your own, and it's not really that, you know, impressive to just build that 100 more flat health to your already giant 6,000 health, which I did manage to get to about 6,300 health with the Orb Prime buff, and I was actually pretty satisfied with that, because 6,000 health is definitely nothing to scoff at as a total health. I mean, obviously, someone like Rampage is going to have a lot more health whenever he ults, but having that with just the natural scaling and no ult to just have it for a short amount of time is definitely helpful. I think it would have been even better if I would have put a lot more tank items in there instead of trying to turn Sevarog into a bruiser. Because although he does have pretty decent damage for a tank, he does not have many ways of sticking to his opponents without a Siren Song. I did have a Siren Song in there, I just didn't build it. I was way too focused on making sure that I had cooldown reduction at this point, just because I wanted to get those stacks and see how much of an impact they had on my health and damage. I have to say that cooldown reduction did end up working out pretty well. I did not ult too many times in this game, mainly because the best time to use that ult is whenever you're disengaging someone from a tower, or you're knocking the enemy into your team or your tower to engage on them, which is a very tough thing, because if Sevarog knocks you into the tower, then he's got a pretty good chance to snare you, and if he has that, then you are in a bad situation. Sevarog, we tried to catch him out here with 3 people, but Muriel ulted. Unfortunately, she did not have the same assistance from Sevarog that she gave to Sevarog, so we just started chasing after her. Gideon showed up, and he started to black hole. Muriel got into travel mode, but I snared her, so I had to get that siphon off, and we just started to wail on her. Sevarog ults me away, and I accidentally press escape before going into travel mode, but thankfully I was able to get a nice Phantom Rush close to her, get a nice siphon. I was out of mana at that point, so I was really, really hoping that I could get away. I was trying really hard to, but unfortunately, the cards were not on my favor. This is why you don't build flat health on somebody who scales with flat health, kids. I did decide that I was going to pick up the Hunter's Guile at this point, half because it was going to give me some of that more flat health, because I was still under the illusion that flat health was going to help me, and the other half because I was just a little bit salty about all that crowd control taking me out, and I figured a cleanse would help with that. Especially with Muriel's knock-up, the snare from the enemy Sevarog, the knock-up from the enemy Sevarog, and things like that. And having a cleanse item, I gotta say, is extremely helpful. It did save me, and I was really glad that I ended up getting that, because although it doesn't have any immense, active ability or any crazy tanking, it does definitely help whenever you aren't kited as easily. Because a lot of people, whenever they use their crowd control like that, they expect that crowd control to work. And if they suddenly see a cleanse pop out, especially in a game where a lot of people don't know that there is a card that has a cleanse, then people just don't expect it, at least the first time. Gideon got a little caught out here. I decided to get a little snare on him, and then I got some lovely siphon. I just took his soul out of his body and just ate it. That's what Sevarog does. He just eats souls. The other Sevarog, I scared him away by showing him my hammer. He was intimidated by my pauldrons, which have not evolved the second time yet. I don't believe. Yeah, they have not. I'm really close to getting the second pauldron evolution. Though unfortunately, I am still waiting, because I did not do amazing with Siphon this game. I was completely focused on other things. But Siphon is beyond helpful for getting Sevarog that early power. I want to say that Sevarog would have a pretty good laning phase, just because of how many minions would be there to siphon off of, and they'd already be clustered together. So you could have a lot more effective efficiency with the siphon, but that requires a lot of managing the aggro. But I think that if somebody really wanted to play Sevarog, you could very easily play him in lane. I was waiting for my siphon cooldown there. You could easily play him in lane and be just as effective, if not more effective. Because that farm definitely gives him a lot of strength in those early parts of the game. Now, I just walked into the wrong neighborhood and I was surprised that they continued to want to fight there. I was trying to focus on the Muriel, so I slammed her into the wall, but it looks like I was left alone, so I was trying to run, and it was not working out too great for me. Then the Grux comes back, and he decided to lend his assistance, and the rest of my team is now starting to converge a little bit, except for Murdoch, who's just having a happy little time playing solo. And luckily, we are getting kind of close here. I'm out of mana, but I do still have my cleanse, so I'm looking just to get out of there, since my cleanse is really my only way of staying alive. And I have enough mana for Phantom Rush, but again, it's not going to save me if, two of them engage on me and one of them's in travel mode, because that dash is not going to be fast enough to get away from somebody and get into travel mode before somebody in travel mode catches up. So I decided that I was going to help out left lane, since left lane was getting pushed and Murdoch and Feng Mao both got blown up a little bit. And then Grux went down because he looks like he went in for a third time. I was just trying to defend something at that point. I decided the tier 2 was a little bit more important than the tier 1 that was in left lane, especially since Kalari was already there. That, and I had to obviously show off my pauldrons to the other Sevarog. Because if you don't show off the pauldrons, what's the point? The pauldrons are obviously how you can tell if somebody's a good Sevarog player or not. Muriel's here. She's there just to make sure that Sevarog never dies. Not like he'd be very tempted to die anyway, considering how I don't do that much damage against other people with a lot of flat health. Muriel got her ult, which is she got her ult off, which is great because she was trying to roam and make sure that Kalari didn't kill anybody. But thankfully, that did open up some avenues for us to push the lane. Now, Sevarog can take down towers pretty quickly with that sustained damage, especially if you manage to auto attack, then use your siphon between the cooldown between your auto attacks. It does add for a little bit of extra DPS, and his hammer does some work. I didn't use siphon on this at all just because I was really worried about my mana pool. I'd already used a mana potion, and I did not want to be stuck in a fight with no mana, especially since we were pushed up. So I decided that I was just going to save that for a little bit, just get some hammer time going, and then siphon some minions whenever I wanted to feel like making my pauldrons bigger. The Twin Blast ulted, the enemy Twin Blast ulted, but I wasn't really sure what he ulted at. I mean, maybe he was just trying to scare us off and bring us to the gun show, but I was not really that afraid of the gun show. And I'm just wailing away these lovely little white minions. Just getting those extra pauldron points. I'm getting up there as far as farm goes, so it's still definitely not where I want it to be. I want it to be a lot higher than that. But again, this is the first time playing Sevarog, so I really want to focus just on trying to make sure I have those mechanics down, because it doesn't matter how many stacks you have if you don't know what his abilities do. Feng Mao and Gideon were having a hug, and it looked like Gideon lost that hug. It was not a hug that it ended up making Gideon very happy. But now right lane is getting pushed by the Sevarog again, and I of course had to play that mirror match because I mean you just have to compare pauldrons. At this point, his pauldrons are actually bigger than mine at this point, so unfortunately I have the shame of not having amazing pauldrons. And the steal goes in on the Kalari, who's trying to get out of dodge here. I'm just serving as a sponge and just soaking up all that delicious damage. I got my stacks up to 40, which gave me these wonderful things. So now my pauldrons have lovely spikes. And at this point now with my second set of pauldrons, I'm going to really start getting those stacks a lot faster. Now that I'm going to be pushing lanes and getting minions. Because in the jungle, I mean, you only have... The buff camps have 3 minions total, and the regular camps would have 2. That makes it exceptionally difficult to be as efficient with your siphon as you could be in lane, mostly because of the sheer amount of time that you have to put into it. I mean, if you end up trying to get the buff creature as well as both of the little white buddy creatures down at the same time, then you're going to take a lot of extra damage than if you just focus them down. And that's going to be all fine and dandy for you to get those stacks. But then you also have to go back to base faster, or you have a chance of not being able to help out in a fight when you could have in the other situation. So it kind of goes both ways. You want to manage those stacks, though I've always been a lot more comfortable in lane than I have in the jungle. Muriel decided to ult to steal to get to safety. We decided to slam the Sevarog around a little bit. My snare just came up, and I decided I was going to have some hands grasp him for a little bit, and our Murdoch just destroys him. His damage was really getting ridiculous at this point. The minions did take a bit of an exception to me wanting to go back to base. I don't think they were too happy about that. And here's what I'm talking about with the efficiency of Siphon, where you can have those multiples. I mean, if I would have had the mana, I would have gotten a lot more Siphon stacks, but I didn't really build mana until way later in the game, and I have to say it is delicious to be able to have that much mana. Since he, as a sustained damage tank, has to make sure that he does that sustained damage, and he can get those gap closers. I was still building more flat health at this point, because why not? And then I'll go and get a Pendulum of Lords, because more flat health. This had me really, really bulky, but bulky in terms of numbers, but not really bulky whenever it came to actually taking a hit. So I didn't have as much effective health as I would have if I would have built some armor, but I didn't put that in the deck, so that was kind of an oversight on my part. I wanted to push out left lane here since our tier 2s were getting pushed. We've actually been pretty even on towers, which is nice. I have not been managing the harvesters as much as I should have, and that's mainly because I no longer had a harvester's key. I ended up selling it and completely forgetting about, harvesters being important. So I just decided, you know what? Let's just deal with the harvesters that we have. We can win with 2 harvesters out of 7. So I just wanted to steal those there. I plan on getting a better key later on, but I wanted to get that Hunter's Guile just so I could have that cleanse. That cleanse was so important and crucial to make sure that I didn't just get CC'd down that I was willing to sell the Harvester's Key for it. Don't do that. That is not a good habit to have. Definitely not. I would not suggest it. It was more so just I guess you could say there was some salt. There was some salt about that crowd control, and I just wanted to make sure that I could get something to deal with it. I was upgrading all my abilities first instead of my auto attacks just because I felt like the abilities were a lot more useful. And the cooldown on the snare is obviously great since it's a very powerful piece of crowd control. And obviously, the cooldown and damage on Siphon is fantastic because then you can farm better. And if you can farm better, you get more health and damage. And if you get more health and damage, then everybody's happy because you're a really, really full giant spectral ghost of death. One of the things that's a little bit tough about Sevarog is that you really have to pay attention if you're up against an enemy Sevarog to his movement, because his travel mode looks extremely similar to his actual movement. Like you see I'm just moving here, and then I'm doing just kind of moving faster, just swaying a little bit more. So that is something you do have to keep an eye on. Like sometimes whenever you see Grux moving, he flips it so he's holding one of his little bones clubs backwards. And then with Kalari, she ends up dropping her daggers into her little arm slots and she just starts running. But with Sevarog, it's a lot harder to tell. And I think it's important to check that because if you just sort of dismiss it, then he'll catch up to you a lot faster than you're expecting, and then you have a giant creepy ghost on top of you. I'm not sure if that was intentional or not, but one thing that definitely was intentional was our tower getting destroyed. And I didn't get out of travel mode fast enough before I get caught by the Gideon ultimate. So I was just trying to get out of there as fast as possible, but the other Sevarog decided to hammer time me, all the way over here. So now I was just trying to get out. I just wanted to get out of there. So I decided to home run Sevarog away. It probably would have been smarter to home run him into our team, but with Kalari and Feng Mao fairly low, I figured that would have just netted them a kill. Or netted the enemy Sevarog a kill, and that's the last thing I would have wanted. So I just go ahead and let Murdoch chase them, because Murdoch was pretty powerful, and his passive lets him catch up to people a lot faster anyway. So I decided I was going to get this Harvester, let my potions heal me up a little bit, and get some blue buff. Now, there is a rain effect on that blue buff, and I really wonder what that'll end up being. I mean, obviously seems like it'll be something water related, but I'm wondering what kind of creature it'll end up being, since it does have that little rain cloud above it. And there I go with the siphon. And I'm just trying to get some of those tasty stacks, since I know that the pauldrons, they are very telling. You have to keep an eye on those pauldrons, because if you can, well, for the enemy, if you keep an eye on enemy Sevarog's pauldrons, then you can know how dangerous they are, stack-wise. It's obviously not telling of the player's actual skill, especially if they end up just farming for stacks the entire game instead of helping out, but it is something that you can keep in mind. So, presuming that everybody knows what they're doing to a basic extent, you'll know to some degree how powerful or stacked up the enemy Sevarog is, because they're at full stacks at like 20 minutes, which would be really difficult, but I'm not saying it's impossible. Then it would be really, really dangerous to try and fight them. Now, there was a fight going on, speaking of fights, but unfortunately I was not at the health or mana to fight that. So I decided to go back and pick up another rune for my Pendulum of Lords, and then try my best to get there in time. Now, it looks like they were winning the fight even without me there. I mean, currently it was a 2 for 1, and the fight was still going on. However, I tried to get them before they backed, but unfortunately I could not. So I just decided, you know what, it's time for more tasty stacks. Also, the aiming reticle, I believe, for Siphon it moves with your cursor during the cast animation. So that means that you do not have to worry about it casting, and then you turn to try and add them with it, and then you're out of luck. Murdoch tried to chase after Muriel here, but then the enemy Sevarog decided to show up. And he got a snare on the Feng Mao, while I got a snare on the Muriel, and I decided that I was going to go in and apply some pressure here. The Kalari tried to get close. I had my snare up thanks to all this tasty cooldown reduction. I got the hammer and decided to hammer time that Muriel over there, but unfortunately there was not enough of a follow-up to actually get it done. That is the third snare in a row I've landed on the Muriel, and at max rank with some cooldown reduction, it gets you some serious sticking potential. So you can stick to people really well once you have some cooldown reduction investment, and you have that at max rank, which is really important, I think. Since he does have his Phantom Rush, and it is not on the most generous cooldown, I think that it is very important to prioritize how you want to play that Sevarog. I mean, you could definitely play it to where, you can do more damage with the Siphon, do more damage with the Colossal Blow, and do more damage with the Snare. But I think that it's a lot more helpful to have, as a tank especially, to have that cooldown reduction, just because it helps your team out quite a bit more. Not just for the Colossal Blow and disengaging for your team, or engaging by knocking somebody on the enemy team sky high, but also just for that root. Because having a root up every, 8 seconds, and when the snare lasts about 2 seconds, and the slow lasts about 3 seconds, they only have about 3 seconds of freedom before you end up snaring him again. And that's crazy. So he does have a lot of sticking potential, and as you can see, I got my third pauldron upgrade. You'd think, wow, that looks massive. That can't possibly be, not the final pauldron upgrade, but it actually isn't the final pauldron upgrade. They get even bigger than that, and trust me, whenever you see it, it's ridiculous. Now, Muriel ults on Sevarog here, and we try and make something happen, though I get hammer timed away from the enemy Sevarog. But Murdoch does get the Muriel, and I get the snare on the Sevarog, and Murdoch just shreds him. He definitely has a lot of damage at this point, and I decided we were going to be defending some right lane because our inhibitor's exposed, and if we didn't go stop him, then that was going to be an easy inhibitor for them, which meant that we would have to play on the defensive. I didn't want to get the Harvester first, just because it looked like they went back, though I did want to go into lane just to double check and make sure that they actually left. Sometimes they end up hiding for a little bit and then pushing again if nobody shows up, especially if we go missing. Though I did want to make sure that I double checked and pushed the wave out myself, not only for that, but for, again, stacks. I got really focused on stacks and flat health, and although my health looked amazing, I was a lot squishier than I thought. And unfortunately, that almost cost me quite a few times. And it did cost me twice because I didn't have the investment that I really needed to be tanky, though I did have a lot more flat health, so my numbers look pretty. But I did fix that up after I realized how a little bit silly it was to just build a bunch of flat health on top of somebody who stacks flat health and not build any armor to make it more effective health. With that wave pushed out and my mana fairly low, I decided I was going to try and pay middle lane just a little bit of a visit to put my ominous full health presence in the area here. Then I decided to change my mind and go back to base. Because if Sevarog does not have mana, he is not going to be that big of a help. And because this flat health was not enough, I decided to pick up a second Pendulum of Lords. I mostly picked it up for the cooldown reduction, but the Pendulum of Lords is still what I ended up going with. And it's actually starting to get pretty dangerous here to where there are going to be some inhibitors going down. And that's why I ended up going to the left lane, because our tier 2 was getting pressured really hard. And unfortunately, we ended up losing it. So we have all of our inhibitors exposed. And they still have a tier 2 on left and right lane, which is really bad. Because we're trying to make sure that we can get a nice push off, but we never want to fight with enough clarity, with enough people left to actually push. Murdoch, unfortunately, overextended and died, so we were kind of left without what our biggest DPS at this point, and that meant that the enemy team was going to end up pushing. I did end up missing a siphon on a minion there, and I will admit to that. I am still getting used to that short range of a spell, but he is very much meant to stick to people. I would highly suggest something like a Siren Song if you're going to end up building more damage, or at least having a lot of cooldown reduction so you can stick to people better. Because that snare and slow is going to be your biggest way of helping people out. With Muriel backing like that, I just couldn't help but interrupt it, just to make them waste a little bit more of their time. I did get slowed by Twin Blast, and as you see, even with all that health, I am just getting destroyed. And I don't think it's just Twin Blast damage, because Twin Blast damage is, at this point he's not doing that amazing, but it's still enough to shred me to where I just had to back up. I'm just sort of holding the lane here. Because essentially I just wanted to stall till Murdoch was up, because you do not want to fight without your highest DPS. It's just not going to end well, unless their highest DPS has also gone down. Now, Gideon wanted to give me some happy tips on how to get hit in the face with magic, but unfortunately I did not have the time for those lessons. Now, unfortunately, Kalari ended up trying to go in from the side, but she got absolutely destroyed. She was just obliterated and sent to the Shadow Realm with no remorse whatsoever. With that in mind, I decided to stick the spike of my hammer into the ground and scream into the air until I could go back to base, in which case I could pick up more advanced chronos because enough cooldown reduction. I believe I managed to hit the cap at this point, just because of the sheer amount of cooldown reduction from Pendulum of Lords and the advanced chronos that I had. Because I put all of my advanced chronos in this deck. Just because, I was correct in cooldown reduction being very good on Sevarog. I just was not correct in putting that many flat health items on there. I would have probably dropped the adamant edges, put in some more runes for things like physical armor and the like. I had a tempered plate in there, but it wasn't really, I didn't use it. And it would have been very helpful, because although it does give that flat health, it gives the armor, and that's the big thing. because armor is extremely important on somebody who has this much flat health. I really don't know what I was thinking. I get a snare on the Sevarog, and that's kind of the cast range that it has. You see that cast range on that siphon is just huge. And there it is. There is 100 stacks on Sevarog, and you see those pauldrons are just frightening. I mean, it is just ridiculous how how threatening it looks whenever you see these giant pauldrons on someone where it's bigger than the majority of their body, and you have to fight that guy. And he has a hammer. Cannot forget the hammer. I actually ended up picking the red buff up here. I didn't mean to, but then I decided it was completely worthwhile because I was not looking for it. I wanted to zone Muriel out here because there was a double black hole going on. Unfortunately, I did not do that, but I did manage to get the snare on Gideon, who he started to damage pretty well. I was waiting for mana, really wanted to get that Phantom Rush, but instead I decided to use my Siphon. I probably should have waited for a snare there, but I also did not manage to get the Gideon with Siphon, because again, its range is really short, and Murdoch missed his ultimate since Gideon changed elevations. But still, we managed to pick up Muriel and Twin Blast, so that was a pretty good pickup for us. Though since I hadn't built any mana, at this point I was just like, you know what, I'm completely fed up with not having mana, I'm just going to go ahead and just start buying mana. I'm just going to buy all the mana. Good thing about Pendulum of Lords is that at least you end up being able to stack a lot of different stats and you have some versatility to it, which is why I think I kept it in my updated build for Sevarog. But the Adamant Edge was completely useless, and I think that having that major strike really didn't do all that much. I'm just clearing out the right lane here while our team pushes up the mid lane, just because the last thing we would want is to devote all our resources to getting an inhibitor and then lose an inhibitor at the same time. Because this lane that I'm in right now is probably the most important one for an inhibitor. And the reason why I say that is because if someone were to get Orb Prime, then this lane immediately becomes the battlefield. It becomes the specific area that people are going to want to focus on, because you have to get it to one of the points on this side of the map. Left side does have Orb Prime there, but it does not have the goal that you have to take Orb Prime to. And I've had a lot more fights at the Orb's Prime spot where you have to take the Orb than at Orb Prime. And a lot of that is because whenever someone goes for Orb Prime, they're usually pretty conservative about it, and they don't go for it because they, don't want to get caught out. Because once you get that Orb, obviously you know who took it and exactly where they're going to be. That snare managed to get the entire back of the minion wave, which I was really happy with. And Sevarog's wave clear is pretty impressive for a tank, considering, the opposite of that would be someone like Steel, because Steel just does not have the wave clear, neither does Rampage. Sevarog actually does have quite a healthy amount of clear, and I decided I was going to go back. This time not because I was out of mana, but because they were pushing up the middle inhibitor, and I wanted to make sure that I was there. Sevarog's ultimate is very great for a threat against the enemy team, that if you try and take this tower, I'm just going to whop you over the head. I managed to get Twin Blast snared there, and I just start taking a lot of damage. I was just trying to get the, kind of scare them off a little bit, because I did not want to lose everything, especially an inhibitor whenever their inhibitor's down, and we have the super minions. So I was just trying hard as I could just get that wave back, and they seem to be pulling back now that the super minions are sort of just pummeling their way through, because super minions can pretty much one-shot the regular creeps, except for the heavy creep. So I was really excited just to keep that inhibitor safe. Now, I saw that Harvester on the left, and I really did want to get it, but I also wanted to see if we could chase down a kill. Because if we could get a kill, we could get right lane push and get that last tier 2 down, making sure that the rest of their inhibitors were vulnerable. Because again, that right lane is probably the most important lane, in my opinion, to keep hold of. Because keeping hold of that denies your opponent a lot of possibility with Orb Prime. Because Orb Prime is a game changer. Giving tanks another 1,000 health, especially if they have armor and energy armor, giving double damage to pretty much everybody else. It's really effective, and I think that it can honestly either turn a game around or help execute it. I had my lovely problems with mana again, and I was trying to get an attack on right lane since it was pushing up anyway. I did have 3 points, but I was trying to save up, so I did not pick up anything at this point. So I was just going to push left lane out since the inhibitor was getting pushed. I did not want the rest of the team to go left lane to push it, because I did want to get a tower out of it. And Sevarog, while he is great in a team fight, with how powerful Murdoch already was, and the fact that after he killed Gideon just now, there were 2 people down, it was just made sense for Murdoch to stay where he was. I mean, we probably could have gotten an inhibitor, but making sure, again, that we don't trade inhibitors if we don't need to is really important. Because with how powerful the minions are in this game, if you end up letting ranged minions stack up and push the lane towards you, then if that gets to a tower, that tower's going down. It's just not going to make it. I decided to get the blue buff here just because, not just for the cool introduction, but for mana, that tasty, or energy rather, that tasty substance that I need. I keep forgetting that it's energy, not mana, but it is force of habit. I also decided that with that, I was going to take Orb Prime. Orb Prime is not incredibly difficult if you have a fair amount of items under your belt. I was not really in too much of a worry here, thinking that he would kill me. Especially since I could just use my potions at the same time. But I was using up a lot of mana, which is why I was really hoping that I could just nab this, and luckily Murdoch showed up and helped speed up the process. Though I ended up getting the last kill, which I personally, or the last hit, so I got the orb, which I personally thought was a pretty good decision just because I have the dash and the knockback just to keep people off of me as I get to the orb. And if you look, I'm sitting at a nice 5,200 health, which is, beautiful if I actually had any armor of any sort to protect against either type of damage. But I didn't, so it was more so just like I was a giant sponge, a very squishy sponge. Murdoch decided he was going to go a lot deeper than I did as far as my pathing, and he ran into some lovely friends, but I decided that I was going to try and just slip past them a little bit. I didn't want to go down through the lane because I saw that steel was coming. I didn't get the snare either, so I was kind of just holding them off, hoping that they would ignore me long enough for the core to take some damage. Because their middle inhibitor was still down, so they were still suffering quite a bit from all the damage their core was taking. And then they started to all retreat, especially because Murdoch popped up behind them. Now, I missed the snare on Gideon, but I did get the smack on, so I guess that's the snare to some extent. And then I let Kalari deal with him while I went to go get the Orb Prime jammed in there. They didn't really try to stop me at this point, because I believe they were just trying to fight Murdoch. That's 2 people down for their team. And there's the Orb Prime buff, putting me at a 6360 as far as health goes, which means that this is pretty much over. So as I said, Orb Prime is, well, OP. It's meant to be. It definitely helps finish off games, especially for someone like Murdoch with all that damage. You see that he just destroys the enemy Sevarog. He did not have a chance. Even Steel, with his increased defenses, still couldn't handle it. I snared him just to get that lovely assist, and they just surrendered. And that was the first game of Sevarog, everybody. If you want me to maybe do something like an analysis video or a guide for anybody, feel free to leave a comment below, or you just want to vote for who's next. Thanks so much for watching, and hey, you all have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys later.